Welcome everyone to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. Now fully going ahead to the divisional round here in the NFL. The playoffs are in the most exciting part, I would say, now that you kind of get a sense of the really good teams, right? And I think that was evident in a lot of the scores we saw this past weekend, a couple blowouts. And now that we're past that, right now we get into the real matchups and get to determine who's really who in this year's playoffs. So with that in mind, I thought we got a good sense of that yesterday when the Rams defeated the Minnesota Vikings again this season to advance to the divisional round. We're going to cover that in the first segment. Then also going over other wildcard games that we didn't touch on yesterday, like the Broncos and Bills game and the Eagles and Packers game, as well as a lot of head coaching news surrounding the Dallas Cowboys, obviously surrounding Mike McCarthy, and the rumors linking the Cowboys and Deion Sanders once again. So all of that is coming up on today's show, and before we move on to any of those topics, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys are new around here and you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share on anything we talk about today, please don't hesitate to do so. Your guys' insight and, just perspective on anything is greatly appreciated, and it always gives us a different perspective that we can take the conversation in a different direction. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on not just this live show, but any of the live shows across the network, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, I'm able to read it, and get your guys' thoughts on anything that we talk about on today's show. It's also a fantastic way to support our channel, and we rely on your support to keep bringing you the content you love, and we always appreciate it, again, when you guys are able to do that for us. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. So with that being said now, we can jump straight into the game that we had last night. There was only one wild card game on, the last one of this round of the playoffs, obviously, and we got a rematch, another one of the rematches from the wild card weekend. The Rams taking on the Minnesota Vikings once again, and there's a lot you can talk about in this game, obviously, but I think the main thing surrounds Sam Darnold and the performance overall of the Vikings offense. And I think you can make a really good argument that these last 2 weeks, not just yesterday, were the biggest 2 weeks of Sam Darnold's career. And now after everything's been settled and everything's happened already the way it did, I don't think it could have gone any worse for Sam Darnold in that respect, unfortunately. And, especially for Minnesota as well, who lose in the first round of the playoffs again, losing 27-9 after, battling all year with the Detroit Lions, being in contention to be looked at as the best team in the NFC if they would have won that game. Obviously, they fell short, and then they had an opportunity going into this game to get right, going into the playoffs, obviously. But again, it was another 9-point performance, and a lot of that, unfortunately, is going to fall on Sam Darnold and their offense, which we're going to dive into. But unlike their first game that was 30-20, still in favor of the Rams, again, nearly scored 30 points, and Minnesota, on the other side of things, they fell flat once again, and they had their second straight 9-point game, like I mentioned, but this time, it wasn't so much so that, against the Lions, I felt like they just had a very good cover plan, and I thought that game was more evident that Sam really held on to the ball too long, or that he just didn't make up his mind quick enough, right? You don't just have to throw it, or, you just don't got to try and fit it into a tight window. You could always run, or you could always throw it away. I thought against the Lions that was more clear than yesterday, where the Rams defense was just really all over Sam Darnold and all over that offensive line all throughout the game, right? They sacked him 6 times in the first half and 9 times in the game overall, which is the most since 1988. And that's obviously a problem, but a lot of that it goes on the offensive line as well, right? They didn't look any better than really Sam Darnold did, but he's going to get all the attention, right? Because he plays quarterback and he's on that 1-year deal and everything like that. And he was the surprise of the season, but when it mattered most, you could say he didn't do really much to elevate this group, and that's also going to fall on him, unfortunately. So you could tell right away which team looked the most comfortable. And this was kind of something we pointed out in the preview yesterday, how I was just feeling more comfortable with Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp, and all these guys that have been there. Matthew Stafford's been all over the place when it comes to experience, seeing everything. He's seen it all and, has won a Super Bowl, right? He's been in these situations, and that's just where I felt most comfortable in picking a winner. And you could see it right away, right? The Rams go out there, they score on their first possession, and they probably would have scored on their second possession as well if they didn't get stalled off there in their second run at things. But the Vikings, they came out very flustered, inaccurate, sloppy, you could say, and the Rams just never looked back. They just hit the gas as soon as the bell rung, and the Vikings were really just stuttering to start their engines as soon as everything got going, and they just never had a chance to really catch up in this game. And before you knew it, this game was 24-3 at halftime after Sam Darnold fumbles. Jared Verse returns it for a touchdown, that making it, I believe that was when the score was 17-3 at that point. It was getting pretty bad then. And then I believe it was a touchdown to Davis Allen that made it 24-3. But yeah, I mean, at that point, it's only halftime, right, in its respect, but you could just tell right away, just on the eye test, that this was not going to go well for the Vikings at all. And although Darnold finished with 245 yards, most of it came, towards the end of the game when, again, it was all pretty much written out as that the Rams were going to win. So it's a little bit misleading there. But I talked about the Rams, looking more comfortable and efficient, but it wasn't without a couple of their struggles as well. What's crazy about this game is that the Rams were, 2 of 10 on third down, and even though Minnesota was sacked 9 times and they lost 82 yards on it, they also outrushed the Rams as well. And not only that, but the Vikings also couldn't help themselves too much because they had 10 penalties for 95 yards the Rams had 10 penalties for 95 yards compared to the Vikings only 2 for 20 yards. And the last thing I wanted to mention that, although the sacks, were pretty favored, obviously, towards the Rams, and the 2 turnovers also, that's what really ended up being the difference, right? The sacks, the inability for Sam Darnold to get a pass away, and the 2 turnovers, right? It's never going to be easy, or you're never going to win a game losing the turnover battle. And the sacks and the turnovers proved to be what was insurmountable for the Minnesota Vikings overall. But if you were to tell anybody that the Rams were only 20% on third downs and they had 10 penalties for 95 yards and they somehow won this game by, 18 points, something would be missing, you would think, right? That wouldn't add up. But it was so heavily favored in the favor of the Rams defense that it almost didn't matter. Where other games, right now, you look ahead to the Eagles game, those sort of things they're not gonna work, obviously, against the Eagles. So they have a lot to clean up from their standpoint. But I guess that answers a question of whether or not this game was more about the Vikings, being bad, or the Rams being overly, just too good for them. And I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's so much so that the Rams were that much better, obviously, because of the penalties and the inefficiency on third down. And I don't think it was just the fact that the Vikings were frauds or anything like that. They have good players on this team. They have a great head coach. But it brings us to this other point on Sam Darnold now, right? With the whole season that he's had and how impressive he's had, of a year. He's made a Pro Bowl. He has put up very good numbers, but these last couple weeks, and even Sam Darnold said it himself after the game, like, despite the great season, right, nothing really matters unless like you move on in the playoffs, and they weren't able to do that. So that brings you to the idea of what happens with Sam Darnold now, and his contract, and whether or not he's going to stay with the Minnesota Vikings after that, what kind of money they're going to offer him compared to any other teams that were all in on Sam Darnold before, and now after they see that, and the timidness, the rushing, sensation that you got from Sam Darnold, the panic potentially going through his motions and everything like that is something that you have to reconsider now, right? Do you want that sort of performance to happen with your organization now? Is that something that you could fix, or is that something that, kind of drives you away from Sam Darnold now? So that'll be interesting to see how it plays over the offseason. And you don't like seeing how someone's potential long-term deal can be lowered or affected in this way, but it is the nature of it, right? Despite all the success you have in the regular season and the stats and performances and everything like that, this is where it really matters, obviously, right? Nothing in the regular season is worth for almost anything unless you kind of validate it moving on in the playoffs, right? Like we're talking about the Vikings, who could have ended up being the number 1 seed, but they ended up being the 5th seed, and everybody thought they were still a top 3 team. Well, they played like one of the worst teams. I think they were, other than the Broncos, the lowest scoring team in the first round. So it's not a good look, right? All of that work you did in the regular season, you can't really validate it unless you move on. So that's the unfortunate part about it. I mean, you could look at other situations like the Chargers, who people were riding high on, including myself. All of that good work that they did in the regular season, they got exposed in the first round. The same thing with the Steelers, right? Good start, really bad end of the year, and, in the playoffs, they also get exposed. Same thing with Dallas over the last couple of years. That's where you kind of stamp your assurance that you are really a great team, especially just moving on from the first round, I think is a great thing. But the Vikings now are going to have to reconsider, I guess, just the quarterback position, because everywhere else, right, like how much better are you going to get at wide receiver or running back? That offensive line definitely is another spot, but really their defense played pretty well all year, maybe improving in pass coverage a little bit more, but it's just really all about the quarterback. And I don't say that lightly, obviously, because of the importance of the quarterback, but it's a spot where you probably didn't think they would be about like 4 weeks ago, right, when they were on that winning streak. So we'll see what happens with Sam. We'll see what happens with J.J. McCarthy and things like that. It's going to be a crazy offseason, so this is just going to add on to it. But speaking about the craziness about the NFL, we're going to move over and talk about the Dallas Cowboys now and their head coaching position in regards to them potentially hiring Deion Sanders, right? We've talked about this before, and the rumors linking Deion to the Dallas head coaching position while Mike McCarthy was still there. After some developments this week, we've seen how there's been some developments in this connection, so we're going to talk about it, what Deion had to say about it, and how could this either work or not work for both of these two parties to come together. So we're going to touch that when we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing everybody in the world blind.
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue talking about all things head coach, and we make a stop in Dallas, Texas to talk about Deion Sanders and his connections once again to the Dallas head coaching position, because after yesterday's news that the Cowboys and their former head coach now, Mike McCarthy, decided to part ways, it didn't take very long for the news to fly about a new head coach, right? A name that we've heard before in Deion Sanders, but there's been some major developments now surrounding Deion and his connections to the Dallas Cowboys, right? Reports came first from Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports, then followed up by ESPN and NFL media late last night that Jerry Jones and Deion Sanders had already talked about the Cowboys' vacant head coaching position. And this is after, Deion Sanders' second and much improved season at Colorado, right? He finished the first season 4-8, but he just finished his second season at 9-3. And, that's very impressive. That's got everybody jacked up on how, not only Colorado could perform and how well the job Deion's doing to completely shake up that entire program and organization over there in Colorado. And he's doing very well for himself, kind of starting off, moving on from Jackson State and then coming over here and playing some, big-time college football in some of these games. It's going pretty well for him, right? He's developing very well. But there's already, those connections with his son, Shador, and also Shiloh, his other son, moving on to the NFL, and how that could affect Deion. Is he going to follow them over to the NFL? Is he going to try and be their head coach going into the NFL? And, that's a whole other discussion about potential problems and things like that could cause. But it looked like, from what Deion was saying before, that he was just going to stay in Colorado. He hasn't been shy about, praising what he's doing there, what they're doing there, I should say, as a partnership. And it seems like he's very excited about being there. And he's still currently going to be entering the third year of a 5-year, $29.5 million contract that he signed back in December in 2022. So he's pretty much in the thick of this deal still. So any type of other option that he wants to kind of pursue in college or in the NFL, if he wants, a job in the NFL, which is where we enter now with this discussion, there is an $8 million buyout clause for any NFL or college team that wants to hire him in his current contract. So that's where, we enter now into this realm of the Dallas Cowboys, right? Because before, going back to last week, with the back and forth, indecisiveness, I guess you could say, of Jerry Jones and him in one breath saying that he wouldn't want anybody to be part of the Dallas Cowboys that really doesn't want to be there, kind of suggesting that if Mike McCarthy didn't want to be there, that he would have no problem with, having him venture and explore other opportunities, right, if he wanted to do that. But by saying that and kind of connecting it to how he released Ezekiel Elliott, and now Zeke was with the Chargers now that they've gone home, but he related it to that, right? Allowing players, personnel, to venture into other opportunities, right? If they feel that they want to do that. But while saying that, in the same breath, his actions showed the complete opposite of that by denying the Chicago Bears' request of interviewing Mike McCarthy for their head coaching position, while technically it was last week that Mike McCarthy's contract ran out, but the Cowboys still had negotiating rights over him until, I believe, today or yesterday. And I just thought that, one, that was very, indecisive of them, hypocritical of them to kind of do that, right? It didn't look great, but I just felt that also that they wanted to get together one last time and kind of hash things out, and that didn't work out, obviously. So right away, we get to this news about Deion and the Dallas Cowboys, and how this has been brought up before, obviously, of why it would be a good not opportunity, why would be a good scenario for the Cowboys to bring in someone like Deion? And, everything like that that's been said before about how, Deion knows Jerry. He's the kind of personality that could kind of get to him and get him to rationalize in a way, whereas other head coaches haven't been able to do that. Everyone's just been answering to Jerry Jones, and that seems to be like the main argument for having Deion there. But there's that $8 million buyout clause that has to be the first thing that's hashed out if this was ever going to be a legitimate thing that would be happening. But, there's also the idea that Deion is very happy in Colorado, right? He doesn't have to make the move. And he's always said that, or actually he said a couple weeks ago when we brought it up, in relation to the Las Vegas Raiders, how Deion said something along the lines of he would only really consider an opportunity like this in the NFL if it was to coach both of his sons. And neither one of them is probably going to get drafted by Dallas, or at least Shador's definitely not. They're not in the position to really draft him. And it's not only that, but right after, all the news came out about Deion and Jerry Jones having this conversation, right away, Deion communicated it to ESPN's Adam Schefter, the following, sort of statement about their conversation. And he said, "To hear from Jerry Jones is truly delightful, and it's intriguing. I love Jerry, and I believe in Jerry. After you hang up and process it and think about it, it's intriguing. But I love Boulder and everything there is about our team, the coaches, our student body, and community." And I think the best thing, the most informative thing I took away from just this brief statement that he made to Adam Schefter was that he said it's intriguing, right? He said it's intriguing twice in this statement, and I think that's all this really is to Deion. I mean, like, the Dallas Cowboys call you for a position like this in their organization. Of course, everyone's going to take a moment to think about it. Even Deion Sanders, right? Obviously, it's a huge just opportunity, right? Just to come out of nowhere. But I think all it is to Deion is just intriguing. Like, you got to think about it and consider it a little bit, but through some more thinking, and I'm sure they're going to probably talk about it a little bit more, I think it's going to come to a place where, and I think Deion's going to be a great coach, I think he's going to stay in Boulder first and foremost, but through a couple more years there, maybe until his contract runs out, I think he's going to be a great head coach anywhere, really, in college if he decides to stay there, or in the NFL if he decides to kind of make that move up. But I just think that right now, the timing of it all and where this team is, and also, how everything in Dallas and for the Cowboys is just kind of under Jerry Jones, I don't think any of that really mixes to where Deion is right now and what the Cowboys have been and are looking to continue to be under Jerry Jones, right? It does make sense for Jerry why he would want someone like Deion Sanders coming in, right? Him and the Dallas Cowboys would be in the news each and every week with Deion and talking about their games and how everything's going, right, and developing. But if, Deion, I just don't think it would be a spot where Deion would be there. And under how everything is currently running in Dallas, where Jerry's talking right after the game, talking every week on his radio show, making all the big decisions when it comes to rosters and free agency and things like that. I think he wants to do that himself, but also Deion's the same kind of person that wants that control over how to build a team, how to build a culture that he wants to be a part of and that he believes can win games. And I just don't see that kind of meshing with Jerry that also wants to be that guy. I think you can't have both of those personalities under one roof, honestly. And if Jerry maybe wants to kind of reconsider and maybe change his ways for Deion in order for him to come in, that would be a epiphany for everybody, right, around the Dallas Cowboys. They've been waiting for something like that. But I don't think it would be a problem then. If Jerry's willing to do that, then I'm sure they could hash things out if he's willing to do that. But I don't really see that happening. And I don't think Deion is in a spot where he's willing to kind of answer anybody else, right? Because he's already in Boulder, in Colorado, where he's the guy that controls everything, their recruiting, how they run things, their game plan and everything like that. He's building the team that he sees fit to be a great football program overall. And he's fine in Colorado, right? He said it a few times now, right? He doesn't have to take this job like he's not going to have anything else to do. He's got 3 more years in Boulder, Colorado. So I think this is more so of a necessity for the Cowboys at this point. And it is, again, the biggest thing to remember is that I think it's just an intriguing situation that not only have they taken this step, but that they're probably going to continue talking about it. And then I do acknowledge that you don't really know what could ever truly happen, right? Something could change in these conversations that we're never going to know what was actually said. But from the outside looking in, I just don't think, based on the progressions of where we are up until this date, that this is something that could really mature into anything else other than just like an interesting opportunity that was brought to Deion Sanders, right? I just don't think the timings kind of match up. So that ultimately brings the Cowboys back to the older names that have been linked to them. There's Kellen Moore, who obviously has familiarity there. I think they would be interested in just promoting Mike Zimmer. That could be something else that they just kind of settle for. Jason Witten has been mentioned, which is, I don't know, probably the least likely. And Steve Sarkisian is another one. But I don't know, is he going to really leave like Arch Manning and that program that just went to the to the semifinal of the college football playoffs? Is he going to leave them after that kind of year when he could arguably have a better quarterback coming, just next year? It's probably the wildest of the options. It's probably going to end up being like someone like Kellen Moore or Mike Zimmer at the end of the day. But I mean, if they want to really go bold, I think Steve Sarkisian would be pretty interesting if it is reported that they've gone after him. But overall, I think guys like Deion, Steve Sarkisian, and like the guys out there like Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, I don't think they would really just match with how things are run in Dallas overall. And they're just going to need someone that's used to working with Jerry Jones. That's why Kellen Moore and Mike Zimmer make the most sense. So all in all, it's probably going to still be a major talking point, obviously, because it's the Cowboys and it's obviously Deion Sanders. But at the end of the day, I just don't think it's going to mature into anything else other than just, a back and forth conversation. So we'll see. I mean, I'm interested to see where it goes from here, if there's any more developments or if it just kind of stalls out over the next coming weeks, really. But with that, we're not going to move too far off of the Dallas Cowboys because I thought it was also interesting what Mike McCarthy, now the former Dallas head coach, what he's going to do now going forward. He's getting some interest from a couple NFL teams already. He has an interview lined up tomorrow, actually, with another NFL team. So we're going to talk about Mike McCarthy and what the future sort of holds for him and what sort of opportunities are out there for him potentially at the start of next season. So we're not going to go too far. We'll be right back after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into all the head coaching discussions that we've had already, now we get to some more surrounding I guess, a new candidate now into the head coaching pool in Mike McCarthy, where we kind of gave an update probably around this time last week on all the candidates, who is going to interview with who has already interviewed with who, and things like that. Now we got a new candidate after Mike Vrabel was already taken off the market, and the Patriots are no longer searching for a head coach, right, by hiring Mike Vrabel. And now, like I mentioned, it was last week where we talked about Dallas, receiving Chicago's request to interview Mike McCarthy for their head coaching position, and how contradicting it looked, right? Like we mentioned in the last segment, how, if you really wanted Mike McCarthy to stay, and in one breath, your actions are showing that you're not really ready to move on from him, but then in the media you say things like, we don't want anybody that doesn't want to be here. If they want to move on, we have no problem with that, but still, you're not really showing it. You're just talking about it. It wasn't a good look overall, right? And if they really wanted Mike McCarthy to stay, they would have already re-signed him, right? But this year was kind of like a final tryout year for him, and obviously things didn't go their way with a 7-10 record this year. And according to the reports, though, why this, partnership ended up splitting was because they couldn't agree on the length of a new contract. Reportedly, the money and things like that were already agreed upon, but it was about the length of the contract that led to the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy ultimately, parting ways. And they waited until the last minute, basically, like, the Cowboys usually do. But I think this has been the best resolution for both parties, right? And I mentioned it last week where we were talking about the Cowboys declining the Bears' request and everything like that, how I just felt like it was time, right? At some point in time, you just like to just switch things up and not run it back with the exact same, formula that you think is gonna end with different results, but the means of getting there are exactly the same, right? It doesn't really add up, right? If you were to bring up Mike McCarthy back again, Mike Zimmer back again, the offense of Mike McCarthy, Dak Prescott off of a very serious injury, CeeDee Lamb back again, Rico Dowdle, Micah Parsons, everybody basically the exact same team coming back. And for you to expect any sort of better results going forward than the first round of the playoffs or less than that would be pretty foolish. So I just felt like for everyone's best interest, they just needed something new, something fresh to go into Dallas and try to get this project to work that hasn't really worked for the last 2 decades, obviously, based on where they want to be and where they really should be as a organization and as a storied franchise. I think Mike McCarthy has ran his course there in Dallas, right? After a 7-10 season and 3 straight 12-win seasons where that still couldn't get you an NFC Championship game, it just didn't feel like this was going to grow really into anything more. So that's why now that change finally happened for them, and I'm happy it did, even if right now things seem a little cloudy. And I thought Troy Aikman, what he said yesterday, for anybody that watched the Rams game yesterday, and Troy Aikman had something to say about the whole head coaching situation with the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy, and just overall how he said that this position to be the head coach of the Cowboys, knowing that whoever's hired has to basically work and answer to Jerry Jones, leads him into a spot where he feels that this position is not really one of the most coveted ones compared to maybe the Bears or even the Jaguars or even, the Jets or anybody like that, or the Saints, right, is another team that he said that this position might not be coveted as much as those other spots where head coaches and these candidates know that they're going to have a lot more say and really build the team that they want to build elsewhere that's not Dallas. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and it leads you to a spot now where, we just talked about Deion and how they're trying to gauge his interest to kind of take up this job, but outside of him, it doesn't get too much more inspiring, I guess you could say, about the candidates that could and would even want to come coach here. But that was, we mentioned guys like Kellen Moore and Mike Zimmer, but this segment is more so about Mike McCarthy and how this split, I think, is a good thing for him, right? Because moving forward now for McCarthy, he ended up getting that interview with the Chicago Bears after all. He actually has an interview tomorrow with them, and that is, something that maybe a week ago you didn't think that was actually going to happen, and maybe he missed his window. But the Bears have been very open about the possibility of turning every stone to find their next head coach, right? They've interviewed one college coach, I believe, from Iowa State, I believe, to be a head coaching candidate, or they're going to interview him as well. And they have like 12 other guys that they're going to interview as well throughout this very extended process. So they're not just going to turn their head away from Mike McCarthy, even though the Cowboys kind of turned them away. They have an interview lined up with him tomorrow, and that's been one of the most mentioned spots, along with the New Orleans Saints is another one. I've heard that both of them, especially the Saints, are pretty interested in the services of Mike McCarthy and, his connection to the Saints. He was a former offensive coordinator there, and obviously with Chicago, he coached against them, I should say, for, the better part of 10 years, I want to say, with the Green Bay Packers. So they're probably very accustomed to him and his offensive scheme and things like that. So that's really where these two spots come out from, because other than that, I haven't heard too much regarding, the Jets or the Jaguars and, in spots like that. So I feel like this is kind of a situation, I don't know why, but that Mike McCarthy, I feel like, is going to get hired sooner than maybe other guys, like the more popular ones, like maybe Cliff Kingsbury or a Aaron Glenn or a Ben Johnson. Ron Rivera's been thrown around a couple times. Pete Carroll's another one. I feel like Mike McCarthy, because his sort of the teams that are after him is so short, right? He doesn't have to really interview with too many as of right now. I feel like he's going to get hired sooner than a lot of people think. And is that going to end up being Chicago, right? Where I feel like the feeling is kind of mutual and pretty split with Mike McCarthy being the guy to kind of develop and, take on this role of the Chicago Bears head coach and really lead them into prosperity now, where they've had one of their better teams over the last few years, but they're stuck on the hardest, step of developing their quarterback. They have a good one. I believe Caleb Williams is a good quarterback, but they obviously need to see that maturity and growth from him. And is Mike McCarthy really the guy to do that? There are some things that you can kind of pick from to kind of help you answer that question, right? Even though his time in Dallas might seem pretty underwhelming, and he received a lot of the criticism for a lot of the shortcomings of the Dallas Cowboys, and some of them were rightly put on him, right? But he did finish with a 49-35 record in Dallas in 5 seasons, and he made the playoffs in 3 of his 5 seasons as well. So, if you look at that, and maybe it doesn't meet the Cowboys standards, right, just making it to the playoffs, but if you look at places like Chicago and New Orleans, they would die for a kind of run like that, right? In all honesty, they would love to be in that kind of situation after years of, especially the Bears, of not really having any sort of, consistent success like that. So that's what also kind of makes me think that Mike McCarthy is a serious candidate there. I just don't think that they're interviewing him just to make sure they cross them all, just so they make sure they don't cross just every candidate off a list. I feel like they're really considering him, or they wouldn't have interviewed him at all because they got like 12 other guys lined up, right? So I think that's also pretty interesting there. And the same thing applies in New Orleans with them and the kind of season that they had to start, and then for all to just come crumbling down was pretty disappointing. So again, it's another spot where they would love to have, a run of seasons where they're in and around the playoffs competing, and through that you hope to eventually get back to a spot where you're a year in, year out kind of playoff team. And is Mike McCarthy the guy to do that? I think more teams consider him to be the guy more so than I think it's led on to be in like the media and how I think a lot of fans perceive Mike McCarthy. I think he's more respected, I think, around the NFL and more well regarded, in other words, than I think most fans kind of regard him, if that makes sense. So, a place like Chicago with all their weapons and things like that, it would be a spot where he could just walk in and hopefully just get running with that whole operation compared to the Saints or maybe like the Jaguars or something like that. With Dallas, he had a bunch of weapons with CeeDee and, at one point with Dak and how well he was playing as well. If you want to talk about quarterback and the kind of results he had with Dak, that's also a spot where hopefully you can get Caleb to play at that level. But offensively, and the kind of setup that he had there with all the weapons that the Cowboys had there at their disposal, Chicago kind of fits that mold as well. And they're probably the one that fits that mold the best. But does Mike McCarthy's philosophy fit what they want to be, their offensive philosophy? Or are they looking more so to be more modern, like Ben Johnson or Cliff Kingsbury, right? I think you can't really go wrong there, unless you're the Chicago Bears and you know the answer. But I think there's some good and some bad that you could take from that as well. But, watching ESPN today to kind of close out this segment, I heard Dan Graziano talk about how next week would be more of a situation where you see more of these head coaching decisions kind of being taken, right? Because you look at the whole playing field of the head coaches right now, and Aaron Glenn is still playing, Ben Johnson is still playing, Cliff Kingsbury's still in it, same thing with Kellen Moore and Todd Monken, and Joe Brady as well. Some of the guys that are, I think, major candidates to be head coaches, they're all still in the playoffs, so I don't think they would be announced, at any point this week. Once we get to the Final Four, you can kind of make an idea of it, right? Because there's so little teams left, right, that you can make some announcements. But still, up until this point, we're not going to get really any more announcements other than, funny enough, Mike McCarthy, to add on to my last point of why I feel like he could be hired sooner rather than later, just because it's been a while now since the Cowboys have played and everybody else is still playing. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting, right? Because the Bears and the Saints, to kind of touch on those points to close it out here, are two of the teams that are interested in Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, who have probably been the most popular names out of everybody. So will they make like a quick decision to bring in, a guy like Mike McCarthy, or are they going to be waiting it out for, those two other coordinators? That'll be something to follow over the next, weekend, week and a half, and things like that. But that is all we have on the head coaching in the NFL for this episode. And to close it out, we're going to go over a couple more of the wild card games that we didn't get a chance to cover, like the Eagles and Packers game, as well as the Bills and Broncos game. So those segments are coming up on today's show right after we take this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue going over our game reviews of each of the wild card games that we had over the weekend. We didn't get to all of them yesterday, so the last two games that I have on here were definitely worth talking about, because especially this game between the Eagles and Green Bay in the wild card round, where the Eagles ultimately advanced to the divisional round, and the Packers got pretty beat up in this game, right? They got bullied, as, I wrote there in the title, because if for any reason you didn't catch a good amount of this game, all you had to see was Dallas Goedert's touchdown from this game to kind of understand what this matchup was all about, right? That was only one of the plays where the Eagles beat up the Packers pretty well, and they ended up winning 22-10, but it definitely felt like it was one of the most comfortable 12-point, 10-point, double-digit wins I've ever seen, because it got kind of close at one point, but even still, it just felt like the Packers just eventually ran out of gas, and quite frankly, they ran out of people, because it wasn't that not only the Dallas Goedert play that was very, just insane to watch because of how, he just manhandled the Packers cornerback, but right from the first play of the game, right, you look at how this game started, the Packers received the opening kickoff, and Oren Burks for the Philadelphia Eagles smacked Keyshawn Nixon right, in his face mask and forced a fumble on the first play of the game, which was recovered by Jeremiah Trotter of the Eagles. And right away, the Eagles took that. They scored from it, setting the tone of what this game was going to be like throughout all of these 60 minutes. And it wasn't just that Nixon fumbled, but it was the fact that one of their offensive linemen, Elton Jenkins, also got hit hard by Nolan Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles, and that pretty much took Elton Jenkins out of the game for the rest of the game. And then later in the contest, we saw Romeo Doubs go down with an injury, with a head injury it looked like, and he was clearly not in any condition to return after that. And then, there's a couple more guys, right? We had Reed Blankenship just ram into Jaden Reed over the middle of the field after he caught a pass. He hurt his shoulder, and he also couldn't come back as well. So at this point, there's no more Elton Jenkins. There wasn't a Christian Watson. Jaden Reed's out of the game. Romeo Doubs is out of the game. And, Jordan Love is just not looking great really at any point in this game. So things were just falling apart for the Packers, on top of them just struggling anyway against this Eagles defense. And then it was all culminated by that Dallas Goedert touchdown, like I said before, right? Just completely stiff-arming Carrington Valentine out of Philadelphia, basically. He tossed them out of the entire city with the fact that he kept trying to tackle Dallas Goedert high, but he just couldn't get anywhere close to him. And that pretty much put the cherry on top of everything in this game. And Philly's physical defense also, they intercepted Jordan Love 3 times in this game, and they added to just the overall weird year from the Packers, where they had some good moments, but also some pretty questionable moments from Jordan Love and this offense, where it just didn't feel like they took that necessary second step after a pretty impressive rookie year from Jordan Love last year. And obviously, after you get a contract like he did, you expect a bit more of a consistent and just more trustworthy performance from Jordan Love week in and week out, and you just never really got that feeling, I think, all year. And it was pretty evident in his record against all the top teams, like the Eagles, like the Lions, like the Vikings, and all those top teams in the NFL. He was actually 0-6 against all those teams, and he has thrown for 8 touchdowns and 8 interceptions in those games as well. So it's not very optimistic about Jordan Love and his situation with the Packers and just the overall year that he had. Very much a neutral step at best, a sideways step at best, if you will. It definitely wasn't a step forward, and I wouldn't say it was a complete step back, because they at least made the playoffs and they were pretty competitive, albeit with the Lions and the Vikings as well. But, not winning those games definitely has you painted in a different way than, the Eagles who are able to win these games, or the Chiefs, who always win these games. The Lions won most of their games as well, so you're not quite in that category where I think a lot of people heading into this year were very, very high on the Packers, especially after last year. So that was pretty disappointing. And also, Philadelphia's offense, talking about them now a little bit, they didn't really do much, it seemed, in this game. Jalen Hurts only threw for 131 yards. Saquon had the quietest 119 yards I've seen in a good amount of time, and A.J. Brown only had 1 reception on 3 targets, and still it felt like all those guys had as equally as a impressive performance as they usually do. And it was pretty odd in that respect, especially with Jalen Hurts coming back from the concussion and things like that. You know, you kind of knew, or at least I expected Jalen Hurts to start off pretty slow, and I didn't expect him to go out there and throw for like over 250 and 2 or 3 touchdowns. I more so expected a game like this. But the Packers defense, to their credit, they did do a pretty decent job with that. But again, going back to their offense and Jordan Love, it was just never a complimentary performance for them to kind of get the job done. So that was that. And on the offensive side of the ball, really talking about Jordan Love for the Packers, it was only really Josh Jacobs that made the most impact in this game. He gave the Packers their best chance of getting back into this matchup when he had that awesome 32-yard run in the start of the fourth quarter, I believe, and then he ended up scoring because he was down at the 1-yard line, but he ended up scoring and he made the game 10-16 at that point, right? A ton of time left because he scored at the beginning of the fourth quarter, but now when you kind of feel like the Packers offense gave you a little bit something, now it was the time where the Packers defense just couldn't hold up anymore, and they gave up 2 field goals while Green Bay went 0 for 4, and they then threw another interception after a field goal by the Eagles. So that's as close as they ever got in this game, and it was unfortunate because if maybe they would have scored a little bit earlier, it would have been a different story. Maybe they would have been able to tie this game, but because it was so late, I think that their defense just really wasn't able to hold up anymore, and it's unfortunate, right? Because their defense was playing pretty well all game. You know, they held the Eagles to 16 points for the majority of the contest, but their offense wasn't really giving them anything, and then they just sort of flipped in the fourth quarter. So, in one sense, I want to say Green Bay shot themselves in the foot with, you know, constant holding calls, it seemed, turnovers definitely by Jordan Love. The injuries also didn't help anything, and also when you get a play like the Malik Heath play where Jordan Love threw him the pass on 4th down and he didn't get 2 feet in, that's when you kind of know like you were never gonna win this game when something like that happens. Yeah, and I want to say that, you know, the Packers kind of shot themselves in the foot, but, you know, Philly's defense was very good on, when was it, on Sunday, in a game where Jalen Hurts was just coming back and the offense wasn't necessarily what we expected them to be, what we've been accustomed to kind of them performing at their usual level. I think in the same breath, though, it's a little reassuring that that the Eagles can win in a multitude of ways. I know some people will say that, oh, like, they're just fortunate, like I said before, that the Packers kind of shot themselves in the foot. It was more so about them being bad, and that the Eagles, offensively, maybe more so on Jalen Hurts, they're not going to win, obviously, with him playing like this. And that is a little bit accurate, but I think also there is some value in winning these ugly games, winning the 17s to, like, 13 games, right? Everybody just makes it about the offense and how, well, this offense was really bad and your team that won didn't do much better, right? Instead of looking at the defense and how they got after Jordan Love, they were in his face all game, they brought the physicality all night long, and they turned over Jordan Love on 3 different times. So I think just not enough people kind of put value into that, and instead like to look at this offense and say, oh, they're not going to beat anybody like this, like they're going to be eliminated in the next round. I want to make it clear that if they play, you know, to this low of a level, like A.J. Brown getting 1 reception is not going to win against the Lions and probably not against the Rams. I expect that to obviously be increased come next week, and I expect Jalen Hurts to be a bit more comfortable. But in a game like this where maybe you needed other parts to step up, like Dallas Goedert usually isn't involved that much compared to Smitty, A.J. Brown, Saquon, and even Jalen Hurts, right? You don't really see Dallas Goedert taking over a game. So in this game, it was his turn. It was his turn to step up. It was the defense turn to step up, the special teams turn to step up, and they did that. And I think there's some reassurance in that the Eagles can find something to work with when their offense, when their star quarterback, when their star receiver isn't necessarily having a usual type of game. So I do expect that to get better against the Rams now going into the weekend. It's another rematch game, and it'll be interesting to see how the Rams, kind of adapt from, getting run all over by Saquon last time, and if the Eagles, find a way to change anything about their approach, right? Getting AJ involved a little bit more and continuing to just run through Saquon, right? That's the biggest thing that we've wanted to see, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more, as the week goes on. But for the last segment in today's show, I just want to go over the Broncos and Bills game as well from the wild card round and take a look at some of the takeaways from this game, right? The Bills using their run game to perfection, whereas the Broncos, it was pretty clear that they need a run game when it comes to playing against some of the better teams. So we're going to talk about all those points and everything else that we got from this game when we return right after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just to go over a quick recap here of the final wildcard game from this past weekend. Looking at the Bills and the Broncos game, right? I think this was the game that I heard most people talk about there being an upset, being a closer matchup than I think a lot of people were initially giving the Broncos credit for, and all that talk about the Broncos being a tough matchup for the Bills only really lasted about a half, I would say, at the absolute max, because after that, the Bills just really kept taking body shots after body shots and wearing down the Broncos, defense down especially, and the Broncos offense really couldn't stay on the field long enough to kind of stay with the Bills offense, but also to give their defense the necessary break, right? It just wasn't complimentary football as you would have liked to have seen if you were a Broncos fan. And yeah, I mean, the Bills walked right through the Denver Broncos on their way to a 31-7 wild card win, and they now advance to the next round for the 5th straight season, and we'll get a chance to see the Baltimore Ravens again, this time in Buffalo, where, if you recall back to week 4, these two teams, the Ravens and the Bills, met back in week 4, but the Ravens pretty much dominated from the word go all the way until the end on a 35-10 victory in Baltimore last time. So this time it'll be played in Buffalo, and it's also the second playoff meeting between the Bills and the Ravens. The first one was back in 2020 where the Bills won that game 17-3. So it's been about, I guess, 5 years, right, technically, because we're in 2025 since they last met. So it's going to be a lot different, right, because of Derrick Henry and the development we've seen. But we're going to give our thoughts on that towards the end of this segment, just more on this game here for now. For the Denver Broncos, I mean, I would be lying if I said that they didn't surprise me by scoring first on a 43-yard touchdown to Troy Franklin. I didn't think I was going to see that at all. But that's where, everything was pretty much held up after that point, because after that, the Broncos punted 4 times. They turned the ball over on downs 2 times, and all that talk about that Denver defense, and they're a very good unit, but they were just met with the same level of physicality and power, if not more than what they're usually dishing out to other teams, right? Usually it's this defense that's overwhelming opposing offenses and that's running them out of the field and really getting the ball back to their young quarterback and giving him a lot of opportunities to maybe mess up here or there, but knowing that they have a good defense, he knows that he's going to get the ball back a lot more than usual. But in this game, the Bills really took all of that away, and this Denver defense only sacked Josh Allen twice in this game. The Bills only punted 1 time in this game, and they scored on 6 of their first 7 drives in this game as well. So they were really hitting on all cylinders, and this Broncos defense couldn't do too much to stop that, and as well, the Broncos offense too, just with such a small margin of error, like we mentioned in the preview, right? Like, if this game was ever going to be very, very close until the end, that margin of error at that point, towards the end of the game where you kind of come to expect it, then there's no real, big deal made of that, right? Because if the margin of error of winning and losing is towards the end of the game, that's usually what happens in playoff games, right? You'd like to think, but because the Bills were so efficient right from the start, or I guess I should say after the Broncos scored, once, that happened and they kind of clicked into gear, the Bills really left the Broncos really no room to make a mistake, no room to miss an assignment, to not be on the same page, and to not really fluster the Bills at all. So it's a lot to ask for, really, at the end of the day, from a young offense that really just got together this year to go into Buffalo and compete with them at the level that they're used to playing at home. I just felt like it was going to be too much, and I think that was pretty clear in this 31-7 game. So, to the Bills' credit, though, if you want to talk about efficiency and just being overwhelming, Josh Allen was 20 of 26 on the day. He had 272 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 46 rushing yards as well, where James Cook also was the most impactful player, skill-based position player for the Bills. He had 120 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. And as a team, the Bills ran for 210 rushing yards, right? And, Allen completed a pass to 8 different receivers, and more so on just the overwhelming just domination that the Bills had over the Broncos. They had 23 more minutes of the ball more than the Denver Broncos, right? And that's kind of unheard of, quite honestly. And, looking at a little bit more in detail about the drives, right? We mentioned how the Bills were just dishing out body blows to this Denver Broncos defense, right? And you look at the drives that they had, right? They had 6 drives of at least 8 plays or more of at least 5 minutes, and not all of them were even touchdowns, right? But they still were impactful, because even if the Bills are not getting 3 points, it's still a long time on the field for that Broncos defense, right? If you're out there for that long, multiple times, it gets extremely tiring, right? You can only be out there with your starters, right, your main pass rushers and guys like that for so long before you start rotating guys in, especially on that defensive line, especially when the Bills are rotating in like 4 different running backs, and they just keep getting first downs after first downs after first downs, and never really being in a spot where they're in second and long and third and long, where you could really use like Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito to come and pressure Josh Allen. They were never really in those situations. So now you take those guys out of their element, and they got a run block, and they get extremely tired doing that, and now they go off the field, and maybe when you find yourself in a passing situation, they're not, they're too tired to come back on the field and things like that. So that's where I kind of felt that this game would go, right, for that pass rush and the amount of runners that the Bills had. I just felt like they could rotate those guys in on a cycle, and eventually you would wear these guys down, and that's also what ended up happening in this game. And, the Bills defense, not to just overshadow them, because, they held Denver to 2 of 9 on third downs also. So, they also had a part to play in it as well. But really, it was just more about this offense and how dominating and how much they use the running game as well. And that ultimately brings us to this upcoming matchup right now between the Bills and the Baltimore Ravens, right? Where I think over this past weekend, we saw those two games in particular be the most dominating running games out of all the wild card games that we saw this weekend. I don't think anybody had much more of a dominant performance running the ball than the Ravens and Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, what they did to the Steelers, and the Bills and what they put on display against the Denver Broncos. So not only do we get probably two of the most dominating, grueling, just relentless is the best word I can use, running games out of really all the NFL, I would say. Maybe Detroit's got something to say to that, but in the IFC, certainly these two teams are committed and determined to run that ball, and not only with Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, and guys like that, and Ty Johnson, Ray Davis, James Cook, both of their running backs, probably two of the best running backs. No, they're two quarterbacks, two of their best running quarterbacks in the NFL, right? They're not running backs, right? That was the joke with Lamar Jackson before, but he's certainly grown way past that, and he's a great passer. Same thing with Josh Allen and how much he's improved, right? We're going to see how each of them try to implement that running attack, especially because on the opposite side, their defenses know that the opposing team wants to run the ball that much, and not only that, but they practice against a very run-heavy offense as well, so they have some sort of experience and exposure to a team that always wants to run the ball, and obviously the fact that they played each other before, right? And the Ravens really had their way with the Bills, and their running attack was very prevalent in that game compared to what the Bills were able to do. So it'll be interesting to see those running styles kind of match up, and the fact that the Bills are undefeated at home. So, do you side with the Ravens that already destroyed them in their first matchup, or are you more so leaning towards the fact that the Bills haven't lost at home? And I think that's a huge thing to point out, especially in the playoffs, and obviously that the game is being played in Buffalo. And the biggest storyline of them all, the two MVP candidates, right? My two, and I think everyone's, kind of main two MVP candidates in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. You want to talk about legacies and, kind of shifting and placing yourself among the best quarterbacks of this generation, right? It's these kind of games that matter, right? Not only are you competing with the other guy for an MVP, but one of these guys is going to eliminate the other one from these playoffs, and one of them is probably going to get a chance to, more likely than not, play against Patrick Mahomes and have a chance to upset them in Kansas City, and that's where you build these, legacy-defining moments, right? On the road, big wins against big quarterbacks. That's where, these stories are made. So I'm hyped up for it. It's going to be a great game. We're not going to preview it now, obviously, but those are just a little a little tease of what we can come to expect from that game. It's arguably going to be one of the better games, so we're excited to talk about that on the Chip Shot Football podcast later on in the week. But for right now, that is going to do it for us on today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football podcast, you can see more content around the NFL on both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where there's more coverage around the NFL, like the previews, the breakdowns, the breaking news, all the head coaching news now that we're heading into the offseason, all of those sort of things you can find on both of those channels. And for right now, I'll see you guys tomorrow, back here again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live with me, Manny Mardiege, as your host. So I hope to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.